Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the New to the Game podcast. This is Chris. I'm here with Ben, and we are back from our short but not very short break. Excited to be back in the studio and doing some recording. Me and Ben have both been navigating some craziness in both of our companies and ups and downs and growth and lots of other stuff. And that's actually what we're going to talk about today. So today's episode is going to be a little bit different. We're going to give you a little bit of a sneak peek behind the scenes, and me and Ben are actually just going to talk about what the future of New to the Game looks like and about what we're both going through in our companies right now, what we're thinking about as far as this podcast and our community goes. And we're going to have a conversation about what we're hoping to do in the future and let you guys in behind the scenes, because I think that conversations like this and hard discussions and figuring out what you want to do, what deserves your time, and what deserves your effort is something that every entrepreneur and business owner struggles with. And I think at the end of the day, it's a very real conversation that lots of us have to have with ourselves and others. And I think it'll be kind of cool for you guys to be along for the ride. How are you doing today, Ben?
Dude, I'm doing amazing.
Yeah.
I am. January was a crazy month, like you said. I think I traveled 3 to 4 times out of state each time and onboarded a salesperson. And it was crazy. January was an absolutely crazy month. And I would have thought that December with holidays and everything would have been the crazy month. January was the crazy month. And I'm doing well though. It's been the amount of evolution that has just happened only in 30 days. Honestly, I guess at this point, maybe closer to 40 days is remarkable.
Yeah.
I mean, it kind of feels like yesterday, also kind of feels like 6 months ago that you and I were on our trip we flew out to Nashville and then drove to Gatlinburg and rented a cabin and with a couple other buddies of ours and basically hunkered down for 3 days. We all started 75 hard. We ate an insane amount of meat and talked business. And yeah, it's been ever since then. It's been nonstop. I don't know what it's been like exactly on your end, but I know that there's a lot of layers to how busy this season of life has been for both of us.
Yeah. I mean, the last 6 weeks, especially, but the last 2 months have just been crazy. Lots of traveling for me too. I was obviously with you guys in Nashville, and then just before that, me and Kayla had gone to Vegas on a little weekend vacation with a couple of our friends. We also, hilariously enough, I don't even know if I told you this actually, but did I tell you that we got married in Vegas legally?
Yeah, we're legally married.
No. So long story short, because of all the craziness with my previous company and not knowing how it was going to affect my finances, we had a wedding. We got married. We never signed the paperwork. We never got the government involved because if anything
Okay.
really bad happened financially as I was winding down my old company, I wasn't sure how much my old company's liabilities were going to fall on me. I didn't know how my finances were going to be affected. I didn't know on a scale of 1 to 10 how screwed I was, basically. So my
That's crazy.
my attorney said, "Hey, you can get married, but it's a huge risk." So I actually waited, and then once everything was kind of settled and everything was finalized, and I was less worried about the world ending, we were like, "Well, we want to just go to the courthouse and get married," and we decided instead we actually got married at one of those little Vegas wedding chapels in Vegas.
That's incredible. I had no idea, dude.
Yeah, I don't know if I told you guys that.
The Lord knew that you were married, but the state didn't, which if you're asking me, I would prefer it that way just all the time.
Same here. Yeah, well that was kind of the running joke that me and Kayla had was we were married in the eyes of the Lord because we had a wedding, we had an officiant, we got married in front of our friends and family, like a small wedding, obviously. I think we had 20 people there. But then we had never signed the paperwork and gotten legally married. And Kayla, my wife, of course, started digging around, and she was previously married, and when she had gotten married really young, had a courthouse wedding and didn't want to do that again. So she and I basically were like, well, we want to have a whole other actual wedding. Do we want to do like a wedding reception and renew our vows, or do we want to do something fun? So we took two of our best friends, my best friend and his wife, who his wife is one of Kayla's best friends. So the four of us went to Vegas, spent a weekend running around, went hiking in the desert, hung out on the strip, and went to some cool restaurants and just had fun for the weekend. And then we got married at a wedding chapel, and then went right back to running around and having fun, and then came home. So it was like a weekend getaway vacation, but we also got married while we were there.
That's awesome.
And if you don't know, the marriage operation in Las Vegas is crazy. Their marriage licensing office has like 10 full-time employees. And in the time that we were in that office, there was like 15 different couples in that 30 minutes we were there signing paperwork, getting married. I guess Las Vegas marries more people per day than like any city in the entire country.
That's awesome.
Yeah, that was fun. And then, and the business has been crazy because we usually slow down a lot in November, December, January, February. We usually have kind of a lull leading up to the holidays and then a lull until about March when spring season kicks off. But this year we've been booked solid. And then on top of that, we had a massive snow and ice storm. So we've had an absolute boatload of reschedules and cancellations and weather delays. And that's caused cash flow constraints and stress in the business and guys not getting to work their full hours because we just flat out can't work. So the last like 3 weeks, especially, we're kind of just getting back to normal today. The last 3 weeks leading up to today have been very stressful in the business because it's been like 30 to 50% production capacity compared to normal just because of the weather. But thankfully, it looks like it's warming up, so we're kind of getting back to normal.
It's warming up for y'all. It's in North Carolina, we had 75-degree temperatures yesterday, and today it is rainy and 38. So we are I think we just ended what we call our first fake spring, and we're headed towards our next winter, and then we probably have another fake spring, and then another winter, and then hopefully at that point it's real spring.
We'll
see how it goes. Yeah.
Dude. No, I use the term warming up lightly because we're still in a freezing spell because we were 22 degrees this morning when I got out of bed. But now looking out the window, it's sunny and 40 degrees. And warming up for us just means that there's enough sun and enough warmth that roofs, gutters, siding, driveways are not frozen. So we can actually get out and work. Because otherwise it's if we can't get on the roof safely, if we can't drive down the road safely, if stuff is all frozen, then we just can't really work. So it's warm enough to get back to work. It's definitely not warm. It's still beanie hat and a Carhartt vest season for sure.
I love it. That's awesome, man. But yeah, I mean, I feel like so you sort of described it at the beginning of this episode, but the intent here being that we are in a season of craziness, and it made both you and I sort of sit back a few times over and say, is this podcast in alignment with where we are at in this season of our lives? Because the reality is you and I are both building and honestly scaling our companies. You've hired 3 or 4 people in the past 6 months, and
so this time last year we only had two full-time, 1 part-time in the field, and it was just me in the office. And then as of today, we have 5 in the field full-time, 2 part-time, and then I hired 2 VAs to work in the office.
That's incredible.
So we have a full-time administrative assistant VA that handles the lion's share of the office work. And then we just onboarded a social media manager VA in the last couple of weeks. So we have a VA doing all of our Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, everything like that. And she'll probably be able to help with the podcast and content for us too. But she is overhauling our complete online presence for my company because we've had social media forever, but we've never been very consistent or active on it.
Yeah. And I mean, I look at just sort of what I alluded to earlier with the past month, really, the amount of travel that we've done. We just onboarded our salesperson. We onboarded him January 20th. And it's been essentially nonstop. We went to an event. So with the coaching company that I work under, WinRate, they hosted an event last week, which we drove down to Greenville for. and I had my project manager Iris and our new salesman Curtis join us for it. And it was incredible to see the perspective of like what I would have thought was hard, using the word hard broadly, but like what I would have thought was hard in January of 2024 pales in comparison to what I perceive hard as in 2025 February that we are in now.
Mm-hmm.
And I look at that perspective because the amount of work that there's been a lot of personal development work over the past 2 years now.
Mm-hmm.
And looking at where we're at now, I was on a walk. So both Chris and I were doing 75 hard, and I think technically I'm like day 40, but I failed 25 days in because I did not take my progress picture one day. So I had to restart. So I'm on day 15 now. And I was on my walk one day, and it's really awesome because it's just like an opportunity to like get out and think. It's not a painfully difficult workout for me. I'm a relatively athletic guy, but it's just a really healthy opportunity to be outside and sort of just get amazing mental clarity and think.
Mm-hmm.
And I was considering where we're at right now, and like what Chris, you and I were talking about this before we hit record, which was how much stronger our why is right now, and
Mm-hmm.
why that's so much more powerful compared to what our why was 12 months ago. But also, as a result of having a why as powerful as the why that we have now, we're in a position where we can work harder than we ever have in our entire lives. And find not just like work hard and like a white knuckle, like let's power our way through this challenging season or whatever. It's like our lifestyle has evolved to a place where every moment of our day is engaging some degree of hard or challenge. It's just that we've changed the choice of what the hard is that we're going to take on, and we're leaning very aggressively into that. I think both you and I could say that like we're in somewhat of a state of flow with that. And it's been interesting because how that has changed with the podcast is the podcast has become this conversation of why are we doing this in the first place? What's the actual motivation for why we're doing this? Because when we first started, we were both very much like we get an idea in our mind and we tend to sprint towards manifesting that idea as rapidly as possible. It's one of the fun things about the type of guys that we are. But the obstacle of that is that it puts us in a position where if we're not careful, we don't build a rock solid foundation. Not that we weren't intentional not to really build a rock solid foundation, but the motivation changed. We've been around long enough now to where we can look at what we're doing right now and be able to see, okay, it actually might be a little bit different than what we started with day one. And that's not for us to say. I want to clarify. Like, this is not our last podcast. This is not our attempt to say, "Hey, we're shutting this thing down." I imagine maybe some people would have that blowing through their mind. The reality of this is that this is a realignment opportunity for us. This is an opportunity for us to say, okay, what really is our motivation for doing this? Why is this important to us? And honestly, when Chris and I were talking yesterday, we realized we don't necessarily have the same exact why. But the interesting part about it is that just because we don't have the same exact why doesn't mean that the direction that we're heading isn't the same path, if that makes sense. And so I don't know. I'd be curious to get your thoughts on all of this, Chris, because I've vomited a little here, and I want to know, how would you articulate at this point how this season of life, the past, we'll say 6 months, really since we roughly started the podcast, how has it evolved up until this point where you might find a different form of your why than what we would have found ourselves having before, which has obviously changed due to the natural hard and craziness of our lifestyles?
Yeah, man, I feel like there's so many different directions I could go with that, and it's hard to like pick a line, I guess. But I guess at the end of the day, I think one of the biggest things to me is that I think when we first started this podcast, both of us at the end of the day had the desire to give back and help other people and kind of share the ups and downs that we've been through in business. Because we've both been through a lot. We've been through ups, we've been through downs, we've been through easy, we've been through hard, we've been through horrible, we've been through amazing, and we've both experienced a lot of growth since we started our companies. Personally, professionally, as business owners, as individuals, as husbands, as parents, like it's hard to even think about the person I was when I started my first business in 2019 and who I am today. Like it feels like it was yesterday, but it's been 6, almost 7 years. And it's been through 2 companies, 2 rebrands, freaking 50 employees. I mean, so many ups and downs, like closing one business, buying a second company, like going bankrupt, like so many crazy things that basically resulted in a lot of lessons learned and a lot of failure and a lot of success. And I think both of us have that desire to share those experiences, share those journeys, share the things we've been through, and show people how they can do what we did better, or show them how they can create something like we did, but avoid some of the mistakes we made. And I think at the end of the day, that's what most people that want to create content, coach, or do things want. But I think that what both of us are realizing is that that's really broad and it's really big. And I don't think it's narrow enough for either one of us to have that be our why. I think that's a good reason to start. But I think that as we continue, I think both of us are having these ideas and thoughts about like what we want this to look like long term. Whether we want to do coaching and consulting, whether we want to just get better at podcasting, whether we want to create content to help build our personal brands that benefits our companies, whether we want to like be a speaker on a stage someday, whether we want to help people one-on-one or in a group setting, whether we want to do our own coaching and consulting or work for somebody else. Like there's so many different outcomes that come from being a well-known brand personally and professionally. And I think that both of us have kind of developed our own thoughts about what that looks like long term. And we've both realized that we're not exactly on the same wavelength as far as what we want long term, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we're not going to keep doing this. Like Ben said, this is not our way of saying we're not going to film this podcast anymore. I think at this point, since we're doing it right now, I think we can say we're going to. But I think it's hard for us to sit down and kind of rationalize like what is the reason, what is the podcast actually going to look like, what is the frequency of content we're going to create, what's the exact kind of content we're going to create, are we going to move towards offering coaching to people or offering consulting services or offering courses or just having a podcast. And I think that there's, when you look at being a content creator or you look at having a personal brand, there's so many potential outcomes and future potential to it that it's hard to say like, hey, I'm going to pick one thing to be the why of why I'm doing it. Because I think that it's impossible to argue that there's a downside to having a personal brand. Like your personal brand can help you in many different ways do things that you want to do, whether that be just to share things with people, whether that be to do it as a career, whether that means to offer services, whether that means to have a sale, something that you sell or offer to people down the road. And I think both of us had this idea that we were doing it just because there was future potential. But I think both of us are feeling that we need to narrow it down to more specific reasons of why we're actually doing it. And that why is going to tailor how we create content, what kind of content we create, and how often we're putting out content.
Yeah. And the exercise that really prompted me to start thinking more intentionally about this was I can look at the podcast and candidly, like it would be easy for me to say, okay, this is probably something that's not worth the time or the effort because we're not earning money from this. We're not being sponsored. We obviously have just started. Neither of us have like a massive personal brand or anything of that nature. I mean, to be candid, I've deleted most of my social media and I'm like very randomly on Facebook. And it's kind of been that way for almost 2 years for me now.
Mm-hmm.
And that season's changing. I'm stepping into a new phase of life where being more intentional about building that personal brand is definitely something I have a great interest in and intention to do this year. It's going to be a very large area of my attention and direction. But where we are right now is I really needed to identify what are the roles that matter most to me. I did an exercise last week, and the prompt essentially was like, write down all the roles that you play in your life and get extremely granular. The way I thought about this question was like, think about the things that consume your time and your attention. How many of them are there? Or I'll say time, attention, and focus. So like disruptors of focus typically are very much a role that you play in your life. It can stretch as far from husband, father, brother, son, business owner. Business owner can be dissected into about 8 different roles and responsibilities. CFO, maybe you do your own bookkeeping, sales manager, project manager, operations manager, and you can admin. Like you can get very granular with that stuff. But through the exercise, one of the things I've noticed was, I think my total count when I added it all up was like 32 roles and responsibilities, which sounds insane.
It's a lot.
It's a lot, and again, like, I mean, that stretches as far from business and family to, I own a dog. I have to feed that dog. I have to take that dog out. That is a distraction. That is annoying when you're leaving town and you have to figure out someone to watch that dog. That is a role that I have to play in my life. It seems so monotonous and pointless, but like, not pointless to have a dog, but pointless in the sense of like, that does it really matter to track that as a role? And I think yes, because I think you need to be able to look at every position that you play in your life, every responsibility that you have in your life, and be able to say, how is this contributing? Or on the opposite end, how is this potentially taking from the other most important roles of my life? From being an excellent father, from being an excellent husband, from showing up as a business owner. And so where does podcasting fit into that? I really have wrestled with it because I didn't know, in many ways, I still am not perfectly clear on it. Like, I want to give you guys an insight into the decision-making process here, like how we even dissected this in the first place. Because I messaged Chris, we've talked about it a few times over. And at the end of the day, I can't explicitly say, if we stay and do this podcast consistently for the next year to 2 years, that we're going to build this massive brand and we're going to be able to like remove ourselves from our positions at our current companies, and we're going to be able to like go full time into coaching or consulting. I think there's also a side of that where it's like, do we even want to do coaching and consulting? I've known many coaches and consultants that are like, this is an insane amount of work for what we have to do, but it also is super meaningful to them. And on the flip side of that, I look at where I'm at right now, and it's like, do I do the podcast in the more immediate sense? Like, does it contribute to my business now? Is it valuable for my business now? To be able to have a voice on a platform and to have it out there, your name out there. It's like being a politician, and every word that you says can come under scrutiny. I think in the same way, like every word that you says is out there on this podcast. And I think it's unfair sometimes to speak from a place of absolute confidence when you're honestly in a place of uncertainty, because that's literally every day. I think sometimes there are people that are just in the day-to-day, there's a lot of uncertainty. There's a lot of decisions that have to be made that you can't just say, I'm there. And so for where we're at now, it becomes an honest conversation of like, why am I doing this? How is this contributing to either the future version of myself or my future ambitions or goals? Or how is it taking away potentially from my maybe more immediate roles and responsibilities that I put at the highest level of my priority? The thing that I share with Chris was like, I think that I need to be able to pivot away from this perspective of like thinking in my mind that we have to build this community, that we have to manage that community, that we have to seek out acquiring coaching clients, and that we have to build courses and we have to do all this different stuff. Because I am where I'm at in life, like that actually isn't the thing that moves the needle for me as so much as I think so much that I thought it would 6 months ago. What moves the needle for me now is I believe, and this is my opinion of both Chris and I, we have an exceptional dynamic. We work extremely well together. We also have an insane amount to offer. Well, I mean, Chris bankrupted a business and is scaling a second business. I've been in business for 6 years, and it wasn't until my 5th year that I cracked the $1 million mark. there by the outset, most people might look at that and have that fall under extreme scrutiny because they're like, oh, that they don't have that much to contribute. But on the flip side of that, how valuable would it be to have someone in your court or that you in your influence that is able to give you feedback on what contributes or what potentially could lead to you bankrupting your company and how to avoid that? How invaluable would that advice be?
Yeah. Well, and I think a lot about like to be totally transparent and open with the listeners, like I struggled a lot when me and Ben talked about starting this podcast in the first place of, do I really have anything to offer? And what I got told by friends, colleagues, other business owners, coaches, people I worked with was that I don't remember which entrepreneur it was. There's a famous quote out there somewhere where this guy walked into a room full of successful business owners and he was on the verge of bankruptcy. He had a roofing company that was doing $30 million a year, and he had a customer bounce a $300,000 check. And he basically was looking at like, if I don't pull in enough revenue in the next 2 weeks, we're going to go out of business. And he went up to his coach at the time, and his coach was basically like, welcome to the club. If you don't bankrupt a company every 6 months to a year, you're not trying hard enough. And then just walked away. Like, and obviously the goal of entrepreneurship is not to bankrupt a company every 6 months, but it's one of those mindset shifts that I had to have where a business failing is normal and expected in business. Like, yes, you don't want to end up in a spot where you're homeless and can't pay your bills. But if you are starting new ventures, you're starting new businesses, you're trying new things, and you're building things, it's inevitable that a certain percentage of them are going to fail. So, like Ben just mentioned how like it took you were in year 5 or year 6 before you broke $1 million.
It was last year, so I think that technically would have been year 5 for us.
Yeah. So on the flip side, like I broke $1 million in my 3rd year, and I actually went from $60K my first year to $375K my second year to $1.1 million year 3, $1.9 million year 4, and then going out of business in year 5. And I was on track the year I went into business to do almost 3 million. But the difference is that your revenue and your profitability aren't the same thing. And I had lots of holes in my operation that led to lack of profitability. So even though we were doing lots of work, bringing in lots of money, it was going back out just as fast. And someday I'll sit down and film an episode and walk through the exact numbers of what happened and why that business it wasn't successful and why at the end of the day I chose to close it down. Because I knew that if I didn't close it down, it would just dig a deep hole. So, and at the end of the day, like there's so many sides to that issue of like, do I have nothing to value because my first business that I ever grew to that size failed? I mean, that's up to the interpreter of people listening, I guess. But now I have another company that I've had for 2 years that is set to do $1 million this year if we sell enough work, and it's profitable. And it's something that like I can't remember which one of I think it was Tom Reber that said this to me once, but he said, good lessons are expensive, the best lessons are really expensive. And I'm sure he didn't make that up. I'm sure that's a famous quote from somewhere. But it's one of those things where like you can learn a lot more growing a company and then failing than you can by going to business school. You can learn a lot more from somebody who has been there, done that, and been through all the ups and downs than somebody who's just starting or somebody who had it easy. Like you talk to guys that like say, oh, I own a $30 million a year company. And what they don't tell you is that they bought it. They didn't build it. And
which isn't a bad thing.
Which isn't a bad
thing at all.
Yeah,
but
like, don't get me wrong. If you've got the capital to do that, great. But like I think that at the end of the day, I guess to wrap that up because I'm vomiting and rambling now, but like I feel like I had to change my mindset of do I have nothing to offer to looking at all the things I do have to offer.
Yeah, and I mean I was thinking about this on my morning walk actually because I mean, dude, I think I want to say something to anybody that would hear this that could hear these things and be like, okay, it's not like that big of a deal. The reality is that Chris is going to build one of the most successful what do you call it? Soft washing? Would that be the bucket you would drop it under? Pressure washing and soft washing?
Exterior cleaning and maintenance. Soft washing is one of the main services. But
Chris is going to be the owner of the most successful exterior cleaning and maintenance company. I would say within the next probably 2 to 3 years. I'd say it's probably a fair estimate in the greater Seattle area.
Yep.
And it's not because right now we're hearing this conversation. I think it's kind of cool that we're having this conversation now because there is a perspective that we get to, that people get to see of the starting point. We'll say sort of the starting point, maybe the midpoint of a journey that you don't always get to see. For me, it's I did 1 million last year and I had 1.3. And it's interesting for me because I'm like, man, I was a sharp business owner in many ways, but I played a very, very slow game for a long time. And this is the first year that I've ever been able to look at myself with absolute confidence. I did a little bit last year, but last year there was still a lot of hurdles that personally I had to overcome. This year it's been much more of saying, I am the most capable, the most able, and the most skilled person I have ever been in my entire life. I'm going to do 3 million this year. And I don't say that from a place of like, oh, I'm manifesting it or something like that. Like we are implementing a system and we are positioning people. We hired a salesperson that's in perfect alignment with our core values. We are structuring things in a certain way that is going to empower us to be able to do incredible things as a company. And so what does that mean on the front of why this podcast exists in the first place? And the answer I would give to that is because like this is my direct contribution and my honest experience to be able to talk about my journey from where I'm at right now, not with the intent to coach or to earn consulting gigs. I mean, sure, yeah, that'd be fun. I'd love that. Right now, if someone reached out to me for coaching and consulting, my answer would be no. I would say I can't. No, I don't have. You're not worth the time. Not in an insulting way. I just know that I can't because I am contributing to what I just described. I am giving everything I have to what I just described. But at the same time, I want to do this because I want to be able to document my journey. I want to be able to develop a skill for podcasting / I guess sort of public speaking, but podcasting really, because I know that this story that I'm being able to tell right now is going to be one of the most meaningful assets that I have a year from now. I'm going to be able to look back on this conversation a year from now and say, holy shit, I did it. And I want people to be able to hear that and to tune into that and to be able to see the change in thinking that I get to experience. I mean, I can't imagine the change in thinking I've had from the past year to now. I cannot imagine what the evolution of that's going to be over this next year.
Well, and when you look at all the things that we've been through in the last year or 2 years or 3 years, like the exponential level of growth is bonkers, like absolutely bonkers. And one of the things that I really like as well is that I'm in a personal branding and personal marketing mastermind with a guy named Adam McChesney. And one of the things that he talks about a lot is that regardless of what your business looks like, regardless of what you're doing, one of the few things that you can create and do that creates a lasting impression and a lasting, I don't know what the right word for it is, like something that you can't have taken away from you is your personal brand. So putting content out there, creating things, talking about things, showing people what you're about and what you like to do, what you're passionate about, that's something that can't ever be taken away from you. It's something that even if you change businesses, you lose a business, you start a business, you grow a company, that's something that's kind of always consistent. And man, when I look at the growth that we've been through, the things that we've been through, the things that we've done, it's crazy to me to look back on where we were and where we could be going. Just crazy. And,
yeah,
and the season of life we're in is just crazy right now. But there's also just so much happening.
I looked at my phone briefly. It's so funny. I got this message because I just got a message from Sam, one of the coaches in WinRate. I joined WinRate at the beginning of last year. in January, I was at a event for a company called JobTread, and I think they onboarded, I want to say 2 people that entire event, me being one of them, because I sat out at the table and I just like shared my story with Sam. And I was in a place of deep, deep shame and disappointment in that season. And he sent me a picture. He just said his JobTread 2024 is him sending a picture to Clifton, my current coach. And that's me and him at the event. And I'm like more skinny than I am now. I'm bulking right now. So, hey, I'm the gains are happening rapidly. But man, I see this picture and I'm like, man, I was confident I was definitely in a growth phase. So I had much more authentic confidence at that point, but man, I was still so ashamed and so disappointed in myself.
Mm-hmm.
And I look at where I'm right now. So I'll share this. One of the things that we did last week was there's an exercise where you write a letter to your future self. And I sat down and I had done this exercise last February. And last February, I remember writing it. I mean, it didn't move the needle for me a ton. It was powerful, but it didn't move the needle for me a ton. It was just like I was in a really, really dark place in February of 2024. And you envelope it, seal it, sign your name on it, and they give it to you at the end of the year if you go to their event at the end of the year. Otherwise, they just mail it to you. And I remember reading that message, and I cried when I read the letter, the last year's letter, because I was just like, man, I was in such a rock bottom type of place. I was so disappointed in where I was. I was excited about where I was going.
Yeah.
But the letter, the overlying tone of the letter was just like disappointment in where I was at that moment and like really wanting to be out of that place. This year, I sat down to write that letter last week and immediately just started bawling my eyes out because I knew that the entire tone of the letter was so dramatically different. It was, I am a different human being than I was at this point last year. I love and am excited about the direction and also the trajectory, the speed of which I am going right now. I'm like so excited to see what my reaction is at the end of the year because I already have a very, very good vision of exactly what type of place I'm going to be in at the end of this year when it comes to knowing that I worked as hard as I possibly could this year.
Yeah. Well, and hearing you talk about it, like so I've never done that exercise specifically. I remember doing it many, many years ago, but what I do every year is I write a review of the previous year in my notebook or my journal. I write my goals for the following year. Like I write multiple pages of kind of like an audit of my previous year and a plan for the next year. And when I hear you talk about this, it's crazy to think that like you a year ago were in a place of feeling shame and not being where you wanted to be and not knowing if you were heading in the right direction and not knowing what the future was going to look like. And you're now in a place of being excited about the future and confident about the future and are building instead of, I guess, treading water. And I feel like I was, for different reasons entirely, obviously, but like last year I was in a spot where I felt like I was treading water. Like I look at my goals and my review of last year in like December of 2023, January 2024. And personally, I was feeling great, but business wise, I was watching the company that I had spent 5 years building crumble around me. And I had no idea what the next year was going to look like. And then obviously in May, I closed my company. So obviously it didn't go well. And at the same time, like I spent January, February, and March getting this company ready that I run now to be separated from my construction company. I spent that time closing down my construction company and trying to finish jobs and trying to make people whole and pay debts and take care of employees and help employees move on to new jobs that I had to lay off. And it was awful on every front because I felt like I was either screwing somebody over or getting screwed with every conversation I had. I mean, you talk about hard conversations. I probably had more hard conversations in the first 6 months of last year than I've had in my entire life combined. I mean, conversations with employees that I'd had for years saying, hey, I can't afford to pay you, so I have to lay you off. Conversations with suppliers that I had multi-year relationships with and knew by name saying, hey, I can't afford to pay you. Conversations with customers saying like, hey, I committed to this project. We took this down payment from you. We had gone through design and I have to refund you, or I have to complete part of the project and have you find somebody else to finish it because we can't afford it. And then turning around and then 6 months later everything being settled and chill and mending so many relationships and basically having to come to people and say, hey, we screwed up. It wasn't on purpose. We ran an inefficient operation and realized our mistakes. We're fixing things. We made a lot of people upset, but then made a lot of people happy afterwards. And I was shocked at how many people were understanding about it and willing to work with us and willing to make themselves whole. I mean, I even had one conversation with somebody where I owed a guy $20,000 for a deposit for a project we probably couldn't finish. And he literally just said, don't worry about it. We'll figure it out. Call me in a few months when you figure things out. And I didn't know it at the time, but the guy was a business owner of like 30 years and had bankrupted 3 companies in his past. So he literally heard me trying not to cry at the other end of the phone and basically told me like, don't worry about it. And I never ended up paying him. He basically just told me not to worry about it. Because at the time for him, that was pennies. I mean, he was a GC doing $50 million a year. So he just wrote it off. But like conversations like that, it's amazing how much impact that has. Like to him, I mean, obviously nobody wants to write off 20 grand. But to him, it was easier than trying to fight with me on it or have me try to like half-ass the work to make up what I owed him or go further in debt to try and pay him back or whatever. And I know the things that you went through were more on the personal side and less on the business side, and that both of us were stressed and feeling shameful and feeling like we were down and not knowing what the future looked like for totally different reasons. But it's remarkable to see that then 6 months later, we started talking about building this and doing this and giving back to other people and help people learn from the mistakes we made. And it's crazy to see the difference in where we are now versus where we were a year ago. Just, we're different people by every stretch of the word.
And what's cool is that like the only thing that we have to offer is not just the mistakes that we've made and how not to make those.
Yeah.
We are actively experiencing some of the greatest successes that we ever have in our entire lives. I know I can say that. And so to wrap it up, I mean, I'm just excited to share that journey. It's going to change. We're having to pivot the way that we produce our content. We're basically batch creating our content today. We're not going to spread it out over 4 weeks and try to squeeze it all in. It is an honest obstacle. The fact that Chris is on the West Coast and I'm on the East Coast and our time zones are different, and he works very erratic schedules sometimes as a firefighter and running his company. But we want to give what we have to offer, and we want to talk about our story because we're doing amazing things this year. And it's awesome to see. It's exciting. And I think that, I mean, I have seen Chris's evolution over the past, I feel like honestly, just for the past 3 months or so, it's been insane. And I love that because I feel like you've probably heard that whole 1% better every day. And I think that the math plays out to 37 times better by the end of the year. You know, the math seems crazy when you think about it. Most people think about it purely by the most obvious measurable, which would be gross revenue. Like, if I'm being honest, that's not the craziest number in the world. That's actually a pretty honest trajectory. 37 times better is pretty accurate. I would say that Chris has evolved as a human being to become an exceptionally better man and more capable man over the past 3 to 6 months than most people I see evolve over the course of 3 to 5 years. And I feel the same way about myself.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I can't even rationalize or compare who you are today versus who you were a year ago. Like, I don't think there is a metric to measure that on. It's definitely a hell of a lot more than 37 times better. I mean, just since we were in Nashville to today, or just since we were talking 6 months ago. I mean, same thing. Like, you are a different human being and doing so many things to be a better man, better husband, better father, better owner, better manager, that it's such a rapid amount of growth on both of our parts that I think that needing to have this conversation about what this looks like and what our future looks like as we build this podcast or this brand was inevitable, because the amount of growth that I've seen you go through and the amount of growth I feel like I've gone through is just astronomical. And I don't think either one of us says that to be like show offy or braggy, as much as it's just like we're realizing that we're doing so many different things to grow and change and build and become better, that it forces change in every part of our life, because we're not just waking up an hour earlier or going to the gym more or changing little things. Like, both of us have, in proverbial and literal sense, like turned our lives upside down in the last 6 months to become better humans and better people, better business owners, husbands, fathers, everything. And it doesn't come without stress. It doesn't come without problems. It doesn't mean day-to-day life is easier or harder. It's just different. And it's a different mindset, a different mentality, different daily routine, different goals, different build-up, different process. And I feel like that level of change forces this kind of conversation, because it means that you have to reevaluate every single thing you do in every single part of your life.
Yeah. The day-to-day is harder, but it's, I don't know how to articulate it. The quote that we were talking about earlier said it best. It was we heard this quote in a podcast. I think it's Tim Cook, technically, is the person where the quote originated from. It's talking about like the quote that says, find a job that you love and you'll never work a day in your life, which is, I think both of us would agree, is like not accurate at all. I think the way he says, he's like that quote is a total, he calls it a total crock. He says, find something that you love to do and you'll work harder than you ever have in your entire life, and the tools will feel light in your hands. And that resonates with me. I mean, jeez, it's so funny. I'm gonna brag on Chris here again, because I just think it's so freaking impressive. Like, there's this new system that we both kind of started implementing. It's called Notion. It's a really powerful note-taking / database system. It's hard to describe what the function of it is, because it has so many layers of the functions. But essentially is it's a platform. If you're looking to be able to just basically have a second brain, it's a platform for that. And this man discovered, like, I shared with him how I use the platform. I use it for many things in my business, documentation, a lot of different stuff. This man, within like a span of probably 48 hours, spends about 12 hours of that time dedicated on this platform, building it out, basically creating an entire productivity system for himself. Not that we're encouraging you to like burn your candle on both ends to the point where you have nothing left to give, because I think Chris may have gotten a little bit of that out. But at the end of the day, you built an entire system that you now operate a huge portion of your life and your business off of. And we can go talk about that at another time. I know that if you and I both have that opportunity, we would just ramble on for 2 hours about Notion.
We should do an episode on that, because
I think
it's worthwhile, but that's a rabbit hole, a big one.
That's a huge rabbit hole, as Chris's 12 hours was experiencing it for the first time. And I don't know, it's just like, that's the level of person that you've become, where you can discover something. It makes sense. And you will work harder than most people work an entire week, and be more productive than most people will be productive in an entire week, if not longer than that. But it's because it's something you love and you're deeply invested in. It's just flow state for you. And so I know we're gonna talk about this on another podcast, about flow, about work ethic, about working and loving on things. But I think that's something that is really, really a cool expression of where we're at right now. And again, my why for this right now, in this season, it is not to coach. It is not to consult. There's a coach inside of me that always will have a desire to coach people, but at least not right now. I'm not trying to build a business around it. I want to be able to contribute. I want to be able to share my story, share my wins, my losses, and the lessons that I have to contribute, because I think that if someone were to listen to it, they would find them very valuable. And even if they just listen to it to follow our story, I want people to see this story unfold, because the story for both you and I, Chris, is going to be pretty remarkable for what just simply maintaining the trajectory of where we went from last year to this year.
Yeah. And I think that regardless of exactly where this goes over the next 3, 6, 9, 12 months, 1, 2, 3 years, I think it'll be really exciting to see where both of us are going, how this fits into it, and what we're going to build out of it. I don't think it needs to be so specific and so granular that it's like, hey, we're doing this so that we can then create a coaching company. We're doing this so we can then create an offer down the road to sell courses. It's more of a, we're doing this to build ourselves, share what we've learned, put this information out there, be a part of other people's journey, and share our own journey. And both of us are super excited about that. And it might look a little bit different than we thought originally, but I love what we're doing.
Yeah. So guys, I'm going to wrap this up. And our traditional wrap up was an invitation to our school group. It still exists. If you want to join it, join it. It's awesome. At the end of the day, though, if you're interested in talking with us, if you're interested in learning from us, shoot us a DM. I'm Ben Schneider on both LinkedIn and Facebook. I would love to talk with y'all. Even if it's just a short conversation, hey man, I think what you're doing is cool. Shoot us a DM. Same thing for Chris. Alternatively, I'm not going to ask you to share this podcast. You can if you want. What I would ask you to do is listen to the next series of podcasts. You don't need to like it. You don't need to share it. You don't need to distribute our content. We're not asking you to do that. You have more power to you if you want to do it, whatever. I just want you to continue listening. You're going to see the trajectory of both of us. You're going to learn things that I think will be extremely valuable. And I'm really excited about what we have to offer in these next series of conversations. So lean into that, do the hard things, and we'll see you guys in the next episode.